Hi there. There's been discussion about why hasn't Netflix renewed Three Body Problem yet from Benioff and Weiss. Because they keep saying, oh no, it's our top viewership, it's really good. Well, it performed good but not great, and it's number one during an off-season, where they're not premiering a lot of stuff due to the ripple effect of the writer's strike. And don't get me wrong, up front, I admit, they'll probably renew this eventually, just due to sunk cost fallacy. But the viewership was not stellar, and on top of that, it doesn't really justify how over budget they went on production costs. Now, I'm going to make a separate content review of Three Body Problem later when I'm done with all my other stuff. Like a week or two from now, but this video I'm focusing purely on how do you measure streaming viewership numbers, and the ratio between that and production cost. The sole basis of all of this is an article I saw in Tech Radar, which explained how the viewership formula works and compared Three Body Problem's performance to other hour-long Netflix dramas, such as One Piece or live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender. So, how does that work? Because they always try to put a positive spin on things. What can we objectively say about how the viewership did? First section here, the formula. Because different shows have a different number of episodes per season, the method that everyone settled on to measure them against each other is the adjusted total viewership. You take the raw amount of time it was viewed and divide that by the runtime of the series, the length of a series, particularly when you dump it all at once in a binge model. Netflix itself publicly posts these sets of numbers on their weekly list of the top 10 most watched TV shows on Netflix. They post hours viewed in millions, the combined runtime in hours for one season show that's usually 7 to 8 hours, and then the calculated total viewership. So we have all three numbers there in public that I don't even need to calculate as they post these publicly. They are already starting to do that, but one of the results of the writer's strike is they said you have to post viewership publicly if you're paying writers. The old system was writers get paid a percentage of the profit from viewership, and we don't have to tell the writers what we're basing this on. We could be lying. So now the thing is they have to publicly admit what the viewership numbers were, so that they're posting, and they followed through on it, true to their word, that okay, after the strike, we'll post the viewership numbers. Now, there is more than one way to measure the data, and you can skew it how you want. They did give these numbers, it is honest, but there's other factors you do need to consider. This is entirely separate from the metric of, you might have heard, what percentage of people watched from beginning to end is separate, and it's more difficult to determine, and I'm not using those numbers. How many people finished Three Body Problem? That's something I'd like to see. Whatever. And another issue, you see this sometimes, I'm going by hours viewed. That's what Netflix publicly gives, but sometimes for other shows on other streamers, they give numbers in terms of minutes, which just keep consistent, that if you're using time viewed in hours, you need to measure and divide by runtime in hours. If they give you minutes, you need to divide by total minutes. Just keep everything consistent there, otherwise you'll get a weird number. This thing I flashed at the beginning of the video, which spurred me to dash this off, is there's a recent Forbes article a few days ago saying, wow, in its fourth week, Three Body Problem beat Bluey. And this is Forbes, and it only listed off the results in terms of total time viewed in minutes. It only gave the raw minutes without adjusting for runtime. Nor did the writers seem to understand that a shorter show has the advantage because it's the denominator you divide by. Like, if a drama gets 60 million raw minutes viewed and Bluey, in contrast, is like 50 million, well, it sounds like the drama got more than that. But then divide that the hour-long drama, well, that's 60 minutes. I'm pretending it's a one-episode show, but divide that by 60 minutes, the total viewership is only 1 million, you see on my chart here. While 50 million divided by only 6 minutes, because it's this shorter, children's clip show, that 6-minute clip, the result is a total viewership for Bluey of 8 million. I'm making up these numbers, but I'll give you the real ones. This is math. If the denominator is smaller, you get a bigger number. If you're dividing by a smaller number, like 6 minutes. So it presented, it got so much more, like, it's a shorter show. It even seemed to think that having longer episodes was an advantage. They didn't know what they were talking about. And it's not like it's a complicated formula, it's divide by runtime. That they said, Three Body Problem was 1.2 billion minutes, and Bluey, in contrast, it only got 0.9 billion, which isn't really that much. But when you factor in the runtimes, the total viewership for Three Body Problem in its 4th week was between 3 and 4 million, depending on when you start counting. I've seen other separate articles saying that the recent extra long Bluey special, The Sign, it was like a season finale, had a total calculated viewership of 10.4 million. Granted, I don't know what Forbes is getting 963 million from. Maybe that's combined with people, children watch the reruns a lot. They rewatch the older seasons a lot. So I don't know if you can really make a direct comparison, but that one special, The Sign, got 10.4 million adjusted total viewership. This is not drastically outperforming Bluey. But whatever the case, the thing that really stood out was the sentence where he actually said, Three Body Problem is at an advantage over these because it has 8 long episodes as opposed to shorter things like Bluey is only 6 minutes. Like, no. Blatantly, a shorter show getting nearly the same means its total viewership could even exceed something like Three Body Problem. They didn't know how the math works. So that's just a blatant example, but the real thing I wanted to present in this video was this article I saw in Tech Radar, which gave the viewership numbers for comparable shows that you can't really compare. Even if they were similar runtimes, if you divided it up, I don't think it's fair to compare a popular children's cartoon show on a different streamer to an hour-long drama on Netflix. That a fair comparison is other hour-long Netflix dramas, particularly ones that are big-budget adaptations of something else. Case in point, live-action One Piece and live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender. Recently came out same year, so the overall subscriber numbers for Netflix are similar. Then in a similar environment, within months of each other, these things came out on the same platform. And Tech Radar pointed out that Three Body Problem really underperformed compared to these things. Well, first we have One Piece with raw time viewed is 140.1 million hours. Runtime about 7.5 hours. Divide by that, you get total viewership of 18.5 million. Last Airbender, total view time was 153.4 million. That's higher. And the runtime is actually slightly less. It's like 7.25 hours, but you divide that and the official viewership, I'm not even doing the math. Tech Radar did the math. I'm just reading it off. Total viewership for Last Airbender was 21.2 million, if you do that division. So 18, 21. Three Body Problem, total time viewed was 81.7 million first week. These are the first week numbers. divide by 7 hours and change, officially the total viewership first week was 11 million. So it barely did a little better than half as much, total viewership adjusted, as One Piece or The Last Airbender. Granted, those are popular children's show franchises, but this was supposed to be, oh, there's an inbuilt fan base. It was a book. It was a hard sci-fi novel. And on top of that, the whole criticism is you tried to make this the next Game of Thrones. Like Avatar The Last Airbender, on paper, I can see someone saying this will be really popular with children. There's different factions. It's the type of story you can get into with the shippers and the people liking different factions and subcultures in it, or even One Piece, that there's a fandom for it inbuilt like that, versus it's this hard sci-fi novel where physics is the real hero. It was a dumb idea in general principle to try to turn this into the next Game of Thrones. That's really the point here. That if you go, oh, it's not a fair comparison, it's not that kind of show, why did you spend flagship show money on a niche hard sci-fi that could never justify that expense? That it's like if you had tried to turn Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End into the next Game of Thrones. It just doesn't work. Which brings me to next big section. As a broad general rule of thumb, for a show to be considered not just breaking even but successful, its total viewership numbers in millions for the first week should match or exceed its production cost per episode in millions of US dollars. That's my conclusion up front, but when I crunched the numbers, as I'm going to go through the production costs chart here, that just, I've seen this, that shows they considered successful, like One Piece, matched this. So, on a basic thing, if a show costs 10 million per episode, it's considered successful, really successful, if the viewership numbers for week 1 were also 10 million. It has to be a 1-to-1 correspondence. That's when it's considered a breakout hit. Case in point, One Piece adaptation, total viewership was first week 18.5 million. Compared against a per episode production cost of 18 million. So you see, it has to be more or less a 1-to-1 correspondence like that. Similarly, Avatar The Last Airbender live action, first week viewership 21.2 million, actually had a per episode cost of 15 million. So it cost less per episode and had higher viewership. I know the critical reaction was a bit more mixed, but keep in mind, Avatar, the animated series, got huge on Netflix during the pandemic. So the advantages of an inbuilt fan base, that younger audience doesn't know what's good all the time, but people are watching it. Good for the actors, good for representation, that they're having this big Asia set fantasy and everything. Good for them. I hope they iron out the rough spots next season, but good for them. I'm not watching, but okay, One Piece is the bigger example for us, even though Avatar did even better than that. But you see how this is how much you need to be getting viewership-wise compared to per episode production cost in order to be considered successful. This is still lower than the production cost on, like, Stranger Things, but that's like the flagship show for Netflix, of like the top 3 to 5 shows that they make in terms of, dramas like that. And it's in its 4th season. Another reason that One Piece and Avatar are good comparisons is they're also in their first seasons. Stranger Things, well, it takes time to build up to the level it gets, so it gets really high viewership, and it has even higher production cost per episode, but it's worth it. It earned it already. That Stranger Things Season 4, the per episode production cost was 30 million. But the adjusted viewership was nearly 60 million per episode, so that evens out in terms of what they were doing. On top of that, it aired in 2 batches, so arguably it's twice as much. It's complicated, but that isn't a fair comparison to Three Body Problems, so I'm not going to use it. But in terms of when you're looking at, well, what is the ceiling for production costs? Stranger Things is huge, but it worked its way up to that. that officially Three Body Problem is the most expensive new show that Netflix has made. That the most expensive first season. Stranger Things worked its way up to $30 million because the show earned it because it was popular. So now let me run down my chart of production costs per episode, because they have variable lengths, and I'm sticking to in-house Netflix shows because it's not always fair to compare it to like Disney or whatever HBO is doing. Stranger Things is at the ceiling. That's unusual, with like $30 million per episode. Then you've got One Piece, $18 million per episode. Avatar, $15 million per episode. Going down, you have Sandman, which is a great adaptation, $15 million per episode. The Crown, $13. The Witcher was actually about $10 million. Ozark, which is this big, critical darling, which isn't really that expensive because it's a crime drama, that was about $8 million, and that's a few years ago, so it's not a fair comparison. Squid Game only cost $2.4 million per episode because they got it from Korea, and it just worked its way up the algorithm. It wasn't meant to launch as a flagship. It was just something that bubbled up in popularity. Other shows, and again, I don't think you can easily compare things to HBO Max, because it's this hybrid system that nowadays about a third of viewership comes from the HBO cable channel, 2/3 from HBO Max. So they have this complicated way of calculating I'm not going to get into, but officially, short version, House of the Dragon cost $20 million per episode. And the viewership adjusted was, the number we're hearing is 29 million. Roughly. Something in the upper 20s. So when I said the production cost, the viewership has to exceed the production cost in millions, 29 to 20. And they said this set viewership records. This was really successful. It is a profitable show, not just something we're making it a loss to get awards. But vaguely, I don't even, arguably might not be fair to compare those numbers, but it is a successful show, and the viewership is somewhere in the upper 20 millions. Let's stick to, again, the fair comparison, One Piece and Last Airbender, in terms of what we're doing. Even so, Three Body Problem cost as much to make per episode as House of the Dragon. $20 million per episode. And that's not even getting into that Benioff and Weiss got this giant 5-year multi-show development contract in 2019 for astonishing $250 million, then sat on their asses and didn't do anything with it. But that is another price tag you need to consider. Separate video I have about this, that they have a giant fee for this. Also the licensing fee just to have the show, regardless of who the showrunner is, that they had to pay through the nose to Yuzu Group to get this. Amazon passed on this project because they thought it was too expensive. So there's a license, there's what they spent on the showrunners, not even getting into that this cost $20 million per episode, out of the gate in its first season. And the viewership numbers first week were 11 million. I say, like One Piece was 18.5 million viewership against a per episode 18 million. Avatar was 21.2 million against a 15 million. That's generally what's considered good. The numbers One Piece and Avatar were getting, that the viewership was exceeding cost by so many millions. Instead, Three Body Problem cost 20 million per episode and was only pulling in 11 million first week. And it does go up after that, but it's not. They always go, oh, the second week went up, because it's stupid. They measure viewership from Sunday to Sunday, even when they premiere most of their shows on like Wednesday, Thursday. So everything goes up in week 2 because it's the first full week, you idiots. Now, that is a thing. Sometimes shows increase through the algorithm and become breakout hits. That has been known to happen, like Squid Game, but thing is, even Netflix itself has acknowledged we usually check how shows are doing by week 4. That's why they didn't renew it, but they didn't cancel it either. After the first 2 weeks, they said, well, I read an article saying this, officially Netflix would wait the first 4 weeks to see how something is doing, because they know from their data, sometimes it takes things that long to trend through the algorithm, but if it hasn't started suddenly increasing by week 4 through the algorithm, it never will, or probably won't. So look at the first 4-week numbers of Three Body Problem compared to just One Piece. 11 to 18.5. Second week it goes up because it's the first full week, so it's 15.6 to One Piece's 19.3. Then 8.3 to 10, and 4.8 to 6.2. Now, it is normal. One Piece is what I'm using as a standard for what's normal. You see One Piece declining from 19 to 10 to 6 because everyone watched it. Three Body Problem went from 15 to 8 to 4. That's pretty much part of the course. It didn't suddenly go up again. For a while there, they were promising, well, by week 3 it'll start trending. It'll be a sleeper hit. That they move the goalposts. When it isn't a breakout hit in its first week, they go, oh, well, it's a new thing. People need to find it, which is fair enough. Even Netflix acknowledges if by week 4 it didn't suddenly start finding an audience that it didn't have in week 1, as people were testing the waters, it really probably won't. So there wasn't this late surge internationally or through the algorithm as people discovered it. It had its moment, and then it went away. And they keep saying it's number 1, again, because there isn't really any other major Netflix release on that scale in March, April of this year. Still, this raises the issue of how bad does something need to be to not merit another season at Netflix. Now, they cancel stuff all the time. That is another factor. How bad does it have to be to override the sunk cost fallacy? Benioff preys on that all the time. That's how he got Game of Thrones after the failed Game of Thrones pilot. That he infamously, I can't believe we just smiled and nodded at this at the time, that wasn't normal. That we later found out he said, oh yeah, I just told them, look, you spent $10 million on this, and mostly from taking out foreign loans against a pilot. The only way you're going to see that money again is if you at least let us finish season 1. That they knew he didn't know what he was doing after the pilot, and they were just burning off content. And they were smart enough to rely on other people for season 1. They were figureheads. And this is a whole separate thing with the review I'm going to do of this, of how much of this, it was a presentable show, don't get me wrong. When I watched it, the short version here is, it was pleasant. There were no obvious points where it was falling on its face with, like, season 8 nonsense. But it wasn't this breakout hit either. It was just kind of generic. And even the presentable parts, how much of this was due to co-writer Alexander Wu, their third co-showrunner on this? He's babysitting them. That how much, but they haven't really specified, and I see people going, oh wow, look at these amazing special effects in like a disaster sequence, and like, how is that the showrunners, something they did? You're praising the special effects department. So who knows if they're even responsible for it being presentable at best. I don't know. And it wasn't like an obvious mega flop. There isn't this huge drama here of out of the gate it was disaster, but even so, you overspent on this so much. And what did you think would happen? That the history behind the scenes of Benioff and Weiss is they overspent and just threw money at things at Game of Thrones. That when they didn't know how writing worked, like Battle of the Bastards isn't a good episode, writing-wise, story-wise, they just threw so much money at the screen they thought it would make up for writing, and for a lot of people it did. But then they just kept doing that, so like the White Hunt in Season 7 is on a giant scale, those are all real extras, or the Winterfell battle in Season 8. They thought, if we throw money at the screen, it'll make up for writing. And I'm going to talk about this more, but the behind-the-scenes videos for Three Body Problem they put out are very upsetting, because they're bragging about how much they spent on the virtual world. Like, how do you even spend $20 million per episode on this? Fully realized sets for the digital world in the VR game. Like, they were bragging about, we invented this new lighting system that accurately shows what shadows would be like on a planet with 3 suns. And it's like, who is checking that? You didn't need to do that. This could have been a digital set, because it's an effing VR world. But in the behind-the-scenes videos, you see their mindset is, we will impress people with how much we're spending on it. When, no, you impress people by getting a good profit margin ratio return on investment. This is a whole different mindset. This is the mindset of, like, the pre-peak streaming. That, remember, they ordered this in 2019 and wrote it as a Netflix 2019 show where sky's the limit in terms of budget, and we don't live in that world anymore. And on top of that, another major criticism going around is that, and they've said this, well, when we conceived of it in 2019, Netflix was really using the binge model, and no one predicted that the binge model would fall out of favor. Which was actually pretty predictable, that you can't build up critical buzz for a show, fandom buzz, if you dump it all on one weekend. That's why TV shows just don't, even 20 years ago, didn't just air things in marathon. The week they premiered, they space it out. And now Netflix is going, wow, when we dump everything on one weekend, people subscribe for 1 month, then drop their Netflix subscription after they binge it. Which is called the churn. That, oh, people only subscribe for a month to watch one show, then stop. And this was a major criticism of Three Body Problem, that this didn't generate enough buzz because it was made using the binge model. Because it's a relic of that 2019 mentality, which extends to budget? What budget? We're just throwing money at it, it'll equal profit. So I just made this to go over the formula. I don't want to get into the story stuff too much, other than this didn't really justify a cost on this scale. And for those going, oh, well, you're saying you'll be canceled, I actually think they're probably going to get duped into sunk cost fallacy, particularly because of how stupid Netflix is these days. They've overspent on this so much, at a certain point it's too big to fail. So they probably will renew this. Simply because what other choice do they have other than to admit a loss of somewhere like $500 million when you factor in the amount they spent on these showrunners, the amount they spent for the license, all of that. So this is officially Three Body Problem did about half as well as One Piece, or live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender, when it cost more than them. This is the second most expensive show Netflix is making per episode compared to Stranger Things. Where did the money even go? You were telling me that you spent this much on a mostly contemporary show, and that's another factor. Having read the books, there is a strong argument that, well, season 1 is mostly set up for the later seasons, that there's a time skip to hundreds of years later when the aliens actually come, and Earth has space fleets and stuff. So on the one hand, yeah, purely from the books, that isn't a weak argument. A reasonable person could say, well, the real story starts in season 2. Fair enough, it takes a while to get going. But you could even argue Game of Thrones season 1 is mostly set up compared to the war that comes in season 2, but because the scale increases, it's this sprawling sci-fi epic, wouldn't that mean the production cost would go even higher? That it's only going to get bigger. It's not. I don't think if they make a season 2, I think they would want a bigger budget than $20 million per episode. They'd need one just for all the special effects. And what, they're going to make the empty promise that, well, because the story is so good, people will come, after underperforming in season 1. So that is why they've been on the fence about renewing it. A smart person objective person would not have renewed this, but Ted Sarandos is making a lot of stupid decisions lately, so I don't know. If they do, the criticisms will start coming out of the woodwork for Benioff and Weiss, but we'll see about that. That once you actually have a failure, that you say it got canceled after 1 season. But in the back of my mind, I'm not holding my breath. I think they're going to renew it. But that's what's going on from the money and ratings point of view. I need to cover other House of the Dragon news leading up to this, but I will eventually post an audio-only podcast giving my thoughts on binging all of Season 1 of Three Body Problem. Parts were pleasant. It's just, this isn't... They literally promised the next Game of Thrones, the next pop culture sensation, and Fallout just came out, and Fallout has really turned into the pop culture sensation of 2024, and who remembers that other thing?